Hello and welcome to my not so short introduction of the philosophy behind the Gaussian-based role-playing system for Shadowrun, in short GABAROS. My name is Erbitar. I'm going to talk about the thoughts I put behind the creation of the Gaussian-based role-playing system. So this will basically include reading you the philosophy part of the wiki, which you can find at gabaros.sessionop.de. And let's start with the principles. So, what should a good rule system be based upon? In this particular case, the rule system is based on 5 basic principles. The first one is consistency. Rules should be consistent. This means that mostly they should not contradict each other, and they should be mostly the same across a large field of use cases. A consistent rule system helps to prevent misunderstandings and supports the game master in making understandable and agreeable decisions in situations not covered by the basic rules. It also helps the players to judge the result of their actions. So, consistent. If a rule system is not consistent, people get confused. If some action is handled with a rule A in one hand and a rule B in another situation, this is confusing people. Not a good rule system. Another important part is that if a rule system is consistent, it allows to extrapolate for situations not known. And the best rule system basically does what the players expect from it. So you should not read all the rules to know what an action will do. You have a certain feeling of what an action will do. If you throw a grenade into a ramshackle truck or something, you expect it to explode and not to vanish into the air or something strange. So basically, a consistent rule set does what you expect from it and does not have any contradictions. Scalability. A rule should scale. This means mostly that the rule system should work over a large span of simulated sizes. A squirrel fighting a slightly bigger squirrel should get about the same result as a dragon fighting a slightly bigger dragon. In this case, the same result does not only mean the general outcome, but also the spread of the results. A scaling rule system should be able to simulate shooting with a light pistol and a tank cannon and everything in between without becoming unusable. Traditional rule systems can have scaling problems in various ways. First one, simulating on different scales does get you the same result. The bigger beating the smaller guy, but the spread decreases rapidly. The small squirrel has a chance to beat the bigger squirrel, but the smaller dragon has no chance to beat the bigger dragon. Although in both cases the bigger one win most of the time. Whereas in the latter it will win all the time. Then there is usability goes down rapidly on higher scales because of the number of dice rolled. And then there's different scales not represented correctly, with a bias toward human scales. So small simulated creatures tend to be too strong and heavy, while large simulated creatures tend to be too weak and light. Because the rule system always tends to favor human scales. And a scalable rule system makes it behave more realistic if you're into this. Then there's complexity. A rule system should be complex, at least complex enough to simulate the proportions or the portions of the world that are relevant to the decisions of the characters or the players in a way that overlaps with the expectations of the players. This means that if you expect an action to have some result, the rule system should be as or complex enough to represent this result in a meaningful way. The rules should be complex enough to be consistent with a fluff description of the world. That's very important. The rules should also be complex enough to differentiate between the various choices the setting focuses on. So, if you make choice A, something different should happen rules-wise than choice B. If they have the same outcome, there are no choices at all. A complex rule system need not necessarily be complicated. It's a different thing. although most of the time complex rules are complicated, but they should. Usability. Rules should be usable. A resolution of situations should be fast. In the best case, there should be no more than one dice roll for any meaningful play decision. So, not like, okay, I want to do something, roll 10 times. So why not roll only one time? You want to know what the outcome of your one decision is. In the best case, it's only one roll. And players should not be forced to do complicated or long calculations. Players should be able to judge the outcome and the risks of a test, which includes complicatedness or exclude too complicated rules. Then there's balance. Rules should be balanced, in the sense that various options should be viable and not be dominant. There should not be a dominant solution. Balanced rule systems promote variety and diversity. Player's choice of a character as well as a character's choice of methods and equipment should not be restricted by choices that are, from an effectivity standpoint, no choices at all. A balanced rule system helps to preserve options. What does this mean? That's a very important point. If people always want to be efficient, especially in Shadowrun, and if there's one option which is more efficient than all the other options, you're not left with any choices. You're left with the best thing there is, and if there is no balance between various choices, then player who wants to be efficient will always choose or be forced to choose the most efficient one. If there are various different equally balanced or equally powerful options, then you really have options and your game starts to open up. Of course, this assumes that people are interested in effectiveness and balance at all. If they are not, balance does not matter. But most of the time it does. So how do you realize those principles in a rule systems? First, consistency. This rule system tries to generalize concepts as much as possible and tries to apply them to various fields. The idea is to have special cases only if needed, and that special cases should be a more fine-grained version of the general rule, with the average result of the special rule being the general rule. Meaning that, for example, Shadowrun has a focus on firefights. The combat rules are much more in-depth, focused, and fine-grained than the standard skill rules. That's because the game focuses on combat. But in principle, somebody who has a skill of shooting skill of 30 should get the same result with the more fine-grained rules when compared to a rule set where the calculations are not as fine-grained. For example, a visibility check or something like this. Fine-grained resolution is just for players to have more options and more things to do, because the focus of the game lies in the aspect of the game. For example, the time modifier table should in principle apply to each and every task that somehow benefits from more or punishes not enough time. However, in the special case of taking more time while aiming, there are special rules because the strong emphasis of quantized time in combat situations. It's an example that tells you that, in principle, there's a table that tells you how better your result gets the more time you take, but in the case of aiming, which is a more fine-grained approach here, you have a special rule which helps you to fine-grain the combat situation, but on average both of the rules should give you the same result. Then there's scalability. This rule system tries to scale from ladybug-sized objects up to at least dragons and tanks in a realistic way. This means two things. First, there are quantitative attributes like strength or maximum life, which scale with weight, meaning that somebody that weighs more or something, for example a troll, has more maximum life and more strength compared to an elf or a human. The exact scaling is not linear due to biological effects. So, for example, elephants, though weighing, I don't know, 10 times or 20 times as much as human, don't have 10 or 20 times as much strength, but a little bit less. Then this rule system returns exactly the same results, statistics-wise, when somebody with strength 30 wrestles with a strength 40 guy, compared to strength 600 dragon wrestling with a strength 800 dragon. Because the relative strength are exactly the same in both cases. Furthermore, the rule set scales in a way that tests between two squirrels takes exactly the same amount of time as the same test between two dragons, or between two experts in contrast to two amateurs. So, which basically means there is no the troll is doing a strength test. 200 dice I have to count. That's not this rule system. Complexity. This rule system uses complex formulas to simulate various physical properties. The main principle is to focus on aspects that player characters will care about, that have impact on their decisions in the game world, or that add a lot to the immersion of the game world. If a player would pick or not pick an item because of a value or property of an item, in contrast to another item with another value in this property, the property is most likely enriching the rule set. Meaning, if there's some property which tells you how good a gun can be hidden, it's a meaningful property as long as people will choose their gun depending on how well it can be hidden. If that's of no concern, you don't have to have this property in your rule set. If it is of concern, you should most likely have it in your rule set. Typical examples are the inclusion of various more detailed properties of wear, weapons and vehicles that help distinguish these pieces of gear, which are very much a focal point of various character interests. This gives them more meaningful choices. Other examples are the inclusion of a hit zone model in combat to help localize wounds and damage. This adds more meaningful choices in armor, as well as adding roleplay opportunities in having localized wounds and damaged limbs. Like crying out, "Ah, I was hit in my arm," and things like this. Then there's usability. This rule system tries to be usable by making tests mathematically simple, easy to judge, and meaningful. Mathematically, the user is shielded from all the complexity in the rule set by condensing everything down to simple numbers that are added or subtracted in most cases. Most task modifiers are normalized such that they are zero in a standard situation, meaning that you have no modifiers. The Gaussian die, that's the one who's doing randomization, itself has an expectation value of 0, meaning that if your skill is 30, you will normally roll 30 on average. Furthermore, dice rolls are only required at meaningful steps in the simulation process, where choices are made. The idea is not to have any rolls that have no impact on player choices. One example are repeated or even extended tests. Instead of rolling time and time again till the character is successful, there's a time modifier table, so that only one roll is always needed. And then, depending on how long you try, your value increases, and you can just look up how long it takes till you succeed. Of course, your game master may make a secret roll so you don't know exactly how long it will take, but he will know. Balance. This rule system tries hard to deliver balance in various ways, following the principle that everything should have advantages and drawbacks. This is true for the three main realms: physical, magical, and metrics, as well as equipment, weapons, spells, vehicles, and more. Wherever possible, mathematical calculations are used to ensure balance. For example, spells and magicians were heavily nerfed in this rule system, because they're basically toolboxes who can do a lot of things, and they should definitely not be better, at least if they're not focusing on it, than, for example, a street Sam at combat. Game world. A good rule system should promote the feeling and peculiarities of the game world. Consistency between fluff and crunch is important as it adds immersion to the game. This is especially true for basic assumptions of a setting. As any RPG has a more or less fictional setting, where having fun is always the number one priority, there will always be some inconsistencies where a suspension of disbelief is needed. But a rule system should try hard to minimize the numbers and severity of these cases. What follows are a number of setting imperatives this rule system tries to support. Shadowrun is possible plausible. The run itself should be possible. No omnipotent security measures, likely like totally automated and ubiquitous facial gate cyberware recognition detection. For every security measure, there should be a countermeasure, or there would not be any runners. So if, for example, there are very cheap cameras everywhere and no way to go around these, what can runners do? Or magic, spirits, finding everything everywhere. That's not a good thing. It should not be too easy to find runners after a run. No extremely powerful search powers, metric searches, and search ritual magic. Because if we had these, corporations would use it. There should be reasons why people with runner power level do shadowruns. Runners should be able to afford the gear they need. So we all know these why not steal a car problem. And especially the prices should be balanced on this. Then there is Shadowrun, this is cyberpunk. Cyberware is ubiquitous. Consumer grade cyberware should not be too expensive. We want people in the real world to have cyberware. And maybe even some more cyberware. Cyberware should be better than Bioware. It's not biopunk, but cyberpunk. Bioware should have other advantages like detectability or the lack of detectability, lower cost at lower essence niveaus, and things like this. But it shouldn't be better. It's cyberpunk and biopunk. Every role has its niche. The following definitions are about roles, not characters that can fulfill multiple roles. So there's the Street Sam, that should be king of standard combat. In large-scale battles, they lose to drone riggers, but large-scale combat is not the standard. So standard combat is you sneak into somewhere, and most of the time, if you have a large combat drone with you, you'll not be able to do this. So the Street Sam has the right combination of stealth and combat abilities. Mages can do everything, sometimes better than everybody else, but they cannot do it often, and not as fast. Basically, in this rule system, there's no such thing as no drain. Drain can be reduced a lot, but there's always drain. Hackers have only a small part in combat, but the matrix is so ubiquitous, hackers are vital. So basically, you can use hackers for everything. You can hack into everything. Hackers are extremely powerful, so they shouldn't be kings in combat. Then riggers are king of large-scale combat and observation. They lack, depending on the drones, the stealth and versatility of a Street Sam. Of course, they can have stealth drones, but a human is always the best thing or person you can bring everywhere. You don't have to explain where humans are, but sometimes drones you have to explain. So they lack the versatility a Street Sam brings to the table, especially in stealth. Then corporations are use available technology. Drone and cyberware pricing should not be too cheap, or nobody would use human guards. Of course, there's always this workforce is cheap argumentation, but well, this only goes so far. And people use available technology. You should look at the social impact of self-driving cars, which are becoming relevant even today, like carpooling, mobile home working, and all things like this. So this concludes the philosophy of the Gaussian-based role-playing system for Shadowrun short screencast. I hope you got some insight on how this rule system was designed and with what principles in mind. And see you and goodbye.